Hi everyone, I'm Reading with Jack, and today I'm here to talk about reading foreign and translated literature. As a language learner of both French and Spanish, I love reading foreign books. They're so fun and there are so many advantages to reading them. I also really love reading translated books into English and translated poetry as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the two and how they compare, how the different forms of literature ultimately affect the translation. And then finally I'm going to end the video by talking about some of the examples of the literature that I have read. So first of all, why do I read foreign literature? Well, I think the main reason is for languages and in terms of improving my language learning, enhancing my language's skills, because reading is such a fun thing to do, and when you can learn in a really fun way, nothing is better. You can pick up a lot of new vocabulary, you can pick up a lot of grammar in its context. I feel like it's a great way to learn. Equally, I'm able to learn about a lot of historical time periods and a lot of different cultures as well. A lot of the writers that I read reference different things that have happened. For example, in a lot of the Spanish books I read, there are a lot of references to the Spanish Civil War and how that shaped Spain as a country. In the French books that I've read, there's been a lot of references to the French aristocracy in the 17th century, and then also a lot of references to the French Revolution. I really think it's nice to read books from writers that have been directly affected by these, either by living in the country or experiencing, different things that happened, and I feel like there's a lot more emotion from them. Equally, I definitely believe that there are a lot of writers outside of the English language that have so many thoughts, opinions, and views of life to share. And I think we have to learn about these and we have to read foreign books and find about different ways of thinking. So now let's move on to talk about translated literature, and the first thing I want to talk about is novels. And I think in general novels are translated quite well. A lot of the translations I've read have been quite easy to understand and they've flowed quite well. I particularly find that it's translations with very similar languages that work best. For example, translations from Spanish or French into English seem to work really well because the languages are quite similar, so you get very similar connotations of different words, the sentences flow well, it's just really easy to pick up on what's happening. I do sometimes find with books where the languages are very different, for example Japanese to English, the translations aren't always as clear. Sometimes they're a little bit disjointed and they don't always flow as well, but they're still easy to understand. So I feel like in general novels are quite well translated, and I really do like that because I think novels definitely appeal to a wider spectrum of people. So if more people can read novels that are translated and hear about different people's ways of thinking, I think that's fantastic. I have to say though, with poetry, I don't think it's always translated as well, and I don't think this is because of the translator being a bad translator. It's because of what poetry is and what poetry represents. Poetry, to a certain extent, has a great sense of beauty. It's very stylized, it's very precise and structured, and I think it's impossible to translate everything, and a lot of the translators have to compromise on one particular thing because you can't have everything. For example, if a Spanish poem is being translated into English, maybe they want to get a specific rhyme scheme. The language can't always be completely accurate because they still need to get the rhyming in. Equally, different rhythms and repetitions, different sounds. It's hard to get everything in when things are translated because of the way a poem is structured. So I think there is a sense of compromising certain elements of the poem, so they're not always as accurate. I have definitely been picking up when I've been reading foreign poems that have been translated, they haven't been as good as the original, and like I said, it's not because of the translator being bad, it's just because of what poetry is, and the kind of nature of translating it doesn't fully work. Okay, so now let's talk about some of the foreign literature that I've read, and I've read quite a lot, so I'm not going to talk about every single one, and I'm not going to be able to talk about everything in great depth. The first one that I've read is Misanthrope by Molière. This is my favourite play by him. It's fantastic. I love the characterisation of Alceste as this man who hates society. He's isolated and horrible, and I just think it's really good to read. And I've also watched a few adaptations on YouTube as well, and they're all fantastic. I also read Les Femmes Savantes by Molière. I actually saw this at the theatre with my French class, so I then read it afterwards. Should have probably read it first, but I read it afterwards. And I really like this. It's not as good as Le Misanthrope. I don't think the characterisation is as interesting, to be honest, but there's a lot more plot to it. So I definitely think different kind of plays work differently, and this one is still very good. I also read some poems by Charles Baudelaire, and he's a really famous French poet, and one of the ones that I read was Au Lecteur, which means to the reader. This is basically the introductory poem to his collection of poems, and it introduces such a great atmosphere, a great tone, great ideas, and it basically almost teases the reader for the things that he's going to explore in his other poems in the collection. In terms of Spanish poems that I've read, one of them that I really like is La Guitarra by Lorca, who is very famous. He uses a lot of references to the Spanish Civil War, which I love, but this one in particular was more about kind of emotion and musical instruments, and how music can express emotion. I thought it was so beautiful. It was so simple, but I really liked it and I was completely taken back by it. I completely understood it. It's this huge metaphor throughout the entire poem. I absolutely love it. The next four are all by the same author, and it's a Spanish author which I always talk about. It is, guess everyone, it's Carlos Ruiz Zafón. Yes, obviously it is. I love Carlos Ruiz Zafón. He's fantastic. I've read The Shadow of the Wind, The Angel's Game, and The Prisoner of Heaven, which are the first three books in the Cemetery of Forgotten Books series. I've read them fully in English, and then I've read a few extracts in Spanish actually. I haven't been able to read them all, and I definitely want to read them at some point in Spanish, but I really love them. I also read The Prince of Mist by Carlos Ruiz Zafón, which is a young adult book of his, which I feel like I might want to read more in Spanish actually, because young adult books are slightly easier with the language, so I think it might be easier to understand that as opposed to reading La Sombra del Viento or, you know, one of the originals in Spanish, because, you know, an entire novel of over 500 pages in Spanish sounds really fun but really intimidating, whereas The Prince of Mist is a little bit shorter, so maybe that's going to be more accessible. The final one that I read is not French or Spanish. It's one that I read that was translated from Japanese into English. It's Battle Royale by Koushun Takami, and a few versions have been released of this translation. I've read the second and third versions, and I think the third version was definitely better. Things definitely flowed better, so I really liked that. I love the intensity in that story. I don't think it's necessarily considered a beautiful translation, but it's not necessarily meant to be. It's more about the action, the intensity, all the drama within the characters and their situations. So thank you so much for watching, everyone. I hope you found this discussion interesting. I love foreign books and I think they're really good to talk about, so hopefully you all want to get involved in the discussion. But until next time, thank you for watching and I will see you all again in my next video.